people in the East Bay. We currently serve Berkeley, Albany, El Cerrito, Kensington, Emeryville, and most recently Richmond and Oakland. And we're creating a place where people can connect with one another well, Ashby Village connects us with one another, offering support and opportunities for meaningful engagement that enable us to age with a sense of belonging and dignity. Together, we're transforming aging in our East Bay communities. So just wanted you to know that we are actively, during this pandemic, we've pivoted, we provide robust programming, we continue to support our members in their homes in different ways that are allowed. So we welcome, if you're interested to find out more how to become part of our organization as a member, volunteer, or donor, we totally welcome you to check out our website and to visit us. I'm just going to leave that as just kind of an opening as we're getting our final guests here, so we can save the few moments that we have that we want to just do for introductions. Our numbers are climbing. We see 341 in our little queue, and we're going to take a few more moments. We had close to 500 registered, so 504 to be exact.
I also want to clarify, because I'm seeing some questions. So this is a Zoom webinar. For some of you, this might be the first webinar you're attending. It's a little bit different. You won't see your normal options for start your video or unmute yourself. The only people who will be able to speak are the panelists that we've preset. So that's why it looks a little bit different than normal.
And someone asked if there's an upper limit for registrants, and yes, we have 500. We can have 500 guests on this call. So, and there's a lot of interest in what we're going to talk about today. It's kind of got all of us we're all kind of a bit captivated, although maybe a little bit less so than a couple of weeks ago. Thank goodness, a little bit of breath. Yeah.
Can you say, it was Julie Harris. Could you say hi to her for me? She's the student of she's the daughter of a former student of mine. And send her love.
She says she hears you.
Yes, this long distance virtual relationship we have with one another these days could be right in the next room or around the globe. And here we are together a little bit, although we can't see all of you. Can see your notes.
Yeah.
So I think given that we're at 4 after, we will start doing our introductions, and we'll get on to the core of our material. So as I mentioned, welcome to this Ashby Village event hosting Elder Action, which is a social justice interest group of Ashby Villages. Ashby Village has many interest groups and support groups and ways of people engaging. And so we want to create a forum for all of our participants to have a chance to share, hear, question. And Elder Action was really appropriately captivated by what happened January 6th and wanting to hear some reflection on it. So as you'll hear, Arlie Hochschild is one of our member of our community who has done some deep digging and understanding of different perspectives and how people are looking at the world, and we're going to have a chance to hear and share about that. So really delighted for you to join us here today. As I mentioned, as people were coming on, Ashby Village is a nonprofit organization located in the East Bay, helping people to age with dignity and belonging. And we serve the larger East Bay. During this COVID time, we've been actively kind of continuing to support community and our members to deal with the needs of living, and we've been providing appropriate services at a distance. So we do welcome you to find out more, check out our website. And as most of these events are free for all to attend, we rely on donations from others to bring programs like this to our members and friends. So I just want to bring your attention to the chat box where we placed a link, a simple way you can make a donation. And we thank you for any support for our programs. You can also go to our website for that. So again, I'm grateful that you've joined us today. I'd like to pass it over to Joan Cole, who's an Ashby Village founding member and volunteer, and on the Elder Action Group, and doing many things on our program leadership team, to introduce Arlie. So Joan, here we go, and have a good journey, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Hello. So, didn't all of us sit frozen, stunned, in horror as we bore witness to the attack on the Capitol on the 6th of January? Our country was traumatized, and there was a panic in the land as we wondered what was next and whether this was a planned coup which would topple our democracy, already on the edge of collapse. In the weeks that followed, many of us were literally holding our breath, waiting for the other shoe to fall. Would it be another attack? Were President Biden and Kamala Harris in danger? Were they safe? Would there be an attack on the inauguration? Was this a master plan for Trump to install himself as our permanent dictator? A fall for our country into fascism. It was hard to believe. It was hard to breathe. My dear friend, Arlie Hochschild, sociologist, author, public intellectual, now sought by scholars, journalists, primetime anchors, and political analysts throughout the world, spends most of her days on Zoom being asked to explain what the Trumpettes want and feel that they need, and how they see the world. This was the subject of her 2016 classic, Strangers in Their Own Land. She saw Trumpism coming. She'll speak with us about that. But I just want you to know about her. Arlie is a trained sociologist who also thinks like a political ethnologist. She's the former chair of the sociology department at UCB and the author of 9 books and more articles than you could ever count. World-renowned, she has long focused on the emotions which underlie our moral beliefs and practices, as well as our social and political lives. Her work is informed by her fascination with people and by her empathy. How, she wonders, how does a person whom I'm speaking with right now arrive at this place? Here's how that empathy and curiosity was cultivated in her early years. Arlie's father was a diplomat. From the ages of 12 to 14, she lived in Israel. From 16 to 18, the family was in New Zealand. When she was 20 and a graduate student, she joined her parents for 3 months in Ghana, where she worked in a work camp. And finally, her first year in graduate school, she lived in Tunisia, where she explored the emancipation of Turkish girls in 3 cities. This is where her fascination with different cultures comes into play in her life and in her work. Oh, but I haven't yet mentioned that she also thinks like a social clinical psychologist, which was the work of her brother, the renowned psychoanalyst, Paul Russell. She wants to hear people's stories, how they grew up, their families of origin, their education, the social and emotional context of their lives, their hopes and dreams, and the limits that they have placed on themselves. What guides her work is her deep interest in how those very different from herself think, feel, act, and view their lives and hopes for the future. She does this by suspending judgment and leading with the hope and the expectation of discovery. She's developed a capacity to hold her own feelings and thoughts in abeyance and to open her mind and heart totally to totally different ways of feeling and thinking. How fortunate for her husband, Adam, her sons, David and Gabriel, her daughter-in-law, Cynthia, and her beloved granddaughters. It's wonderful to be her friend. There's so much more that I could say, but now, Arlie, it's your turn.
We should all be so lucky as to have a friend like Joan. And maybe you know the expression, a sister from another mother. Well, that's Joan Cole to me. In the time we have, I thought I'd just start with this alarming stress test that democracy we've just been through. It tested protection of the place where democracy happened. It was a test, and we failed that test. It was also a test of the institutional practices of democracy. And Trump filed 62 lawsuits and appealed to the Supreme Court, Vice President. So there was that basic stress test, got through it. And the stress test for a culture, the belief in democracy. Is it a serious thing or is it a reality show? Is it something we have faith in or something we suspect? In all those three ways, we've been through that test. It's alarmed us. And now I'd like to address where we are now. There are really kind of two ideas. One out there is that actually the worst is behind us. We've survived. We have a new president, and this isn't going to happen again. So it'll be a turning point, and we'll get a new normal. The other thesis is that, wait a minute, Trump is gone, but the spirit he aroused, or what one respondent I talked to recently said, was putting lightning in a jar. That lightning in the jar, that mobilization of the right, what's going to happen to that? And it's still there is the second idea. And we have to think about it. Of those two perspectives, I'm of the second. I think we do have to look sharp. This could come back. So what has, where are we now? I'd like to use a metaphor of a flood in a riverbank. You've got this river and its flood has raised the level of the river. It's eroded the bank on each side. Populations are retreating each to their side. And I think that's happened to Democrats and Republicans even since 2016. You see it in the polls. There's a tightening, there's a new anger, a retrenchment. And so the bridges a lot of the bridges between these two sides have washed out. And there are certain beliefs that get in the way of thinking it's a good idea to repair them. One of the beliefs, and I hear it a lot, is, if you reach out to the other side, they're crazy, they're simplistic thinkers, and they have their agenda. And to have empathy for them, even strategic empathy, the kind of empathy Joan just described, is weakness. It means you're giving in. Bad idea. You're just encouraging the other side. So there are river beliefs, and that's the first one. Well, not so sure that it's good to build a bridge of any sort. Or you can hear people say, well, it's a fool's errand. All the people on the other side of the river are like the ones you see on television, and they're violent, and if you go to talk to them, you're going to get into a rope-a-dope conversation. No good can come of it. You'll each come back more angry than you went into it for. And I guess I want to address that assumption about bridge building. Is it, and I think there's an assumption that there isn't particular urgency. And I think there is urgency, that we have no time to waste. There is a window of opportunity, and that we don't need to all do this, but that a certain number of people strategically need to step forward and do what President Biden is urging, kind of rhetorically, to create some forms of unity in this country that have been destroyed. So, okay, if many of the people who are here, maybe on one side, let's say the Democratic side of the river, though not all, I'm hoping to have people from both sides tuning in. But if you're in the middle or the left bank of this river, who's on the other side? We know that 46.8%, that is 74 million voters, are on the other side. They were enthusiastic and happy voters for Donald Trump. And they live in the red states, which you probably know are the poorer states. They're the states where there are more social problems, higher pollution, lower life expectancy. They are the states that have actually a lower minimum wage than the blue states. So that's 74 million generally live in those states. And in the latest national poll that I could lay a hand on, January 17th, that is after the January 6th events, 9 out of 10 Republicans approved of Trump's job performance, NBC poll. So it behooves us to explore and be open to understanding what's going on that bank of the river. And
Arlie,
yes,
can I step in really fast? Are your papers near the microphone on your computer? People are getting some like in and out, in and out.
oh,
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just put them down. Is it okay now?
Yeah,
Better?
that sounds good. I think it's just rubbing against the microphone.
Okay. Sorry about
Perfect. No worries.
that. Okay. So the question is, who are the people who are still enthusiastic about Donald Trump after January 6th? And the people that I'm talking to, I've talked to two groups of people. One are people in the very red state of Louisiana, wrote a book about that. And now I'm talking for a new project with people in Eastern Kentucky, and I'll be telling you about them. So they're telling me that there are two kinds of Republican. There's the country club Republican, really worried about not having to pay taxes that are too high, but having conservative values that they're glad to see affirmed. And then there are populist Republicans. And I'm talking to the populist Republicans in Eastern Kentucky. They're people who say that Mitch McConnell isn't right enough for them, and that he did a terrible thing to criticize Donald Trump regarding the break-in. Okay, so that's who is before you. imagine that person on that side of the bank who is feeling this way. Let me say a word about Eastern Kentucky. It's an area that used to be a center of coal jobs, and those jobs have left. These were well-paid jobs. It went up to $80,000 you could get a year. Very dangerous jobs and really hurt your health, but you could get good pay for it. And those jobs are gone. And when they went, people from Eastern Kentucky would go get in the car, go up Route 23, and they would go to Cincinnati or Detroit or Chicago to get a factory job. And then when in the Rust Belt times, those jobs went out, they would come back to Eastern Kentucky and get a job at the Frosty Freeze or the night shift of the Motel 8 for $9 an hour, $8 an hour, $9 an hour. If you were for 10 years at a cigarette store as the assistant manager, okay, up to 12. So that's economically the situation, a slide down. And simultaneously has come a huge opiate crisis. Every interview I do has somebody in the family has been touched by opiate addiction. So they're in hard times, and what you hear from them is a story of loss, of being ignored and put down. One man who worked as a coal miner, the mine closed, he lost his job, he was injured, and he went to the hospital. They gave him OxyContin, which is a very powerful pain suppressant, and he became addicted to this and lost his wife and custody of his children along the way. And he said, when I heard Donald Trump say, he came to Louisville and he came to Lexington, he said, I'm going to bring coal back. He said, I knew he was lying, but I felt he saw me anyway. Okay. And I could tell many other stories, but just one little one of a very beautiful but morbidly obese young woman who was behind she was a receptionist at the hotel I stay in Pikeville. She said, well, you know, my husband was working in Cincinnati in the factory, got injured, and then they laid him off. And so we couldn't handle all the bills. So my mama said, well, you come live in the holler with us and we'll help you with those bills. And so don't stay gone. That's a phrase they use. Don't stay gone, come back. And she said, she was talking about what would happen if she won the Powerball. You know, with all that money, you know what I'd do? She said, I'd put a factory up there on the top of that mountain. It was a sawed-off mountain, you know. I'd put a factory up there. So this is kind of the context. If you're trying to picture the person on the other side of the river, picture this. So now I'd like to tell you to kind of step back and think a little more theoretically about the journey of a grievance. When I started interviewing people on the right, and this was back in 2011, what I heard were complaints. Oh, the taxes are too high. Oh, we're spending too much money. Oh, Obama's giving goodies to the wrong people. That would be affirmative action for Blacks and women and public sector workers and environmentalists. So that was the story. It was just a bag of complaints. So what happened to turn this into lightning in a jar. I think we have to think of the story as having various chapters. And so the first chapter is just you have complaints, but the second chapter is someone's lit a match and turned those complaints into a grievance. And when that happens, what you have is a man that they describe as, well, he's an outsider, he, like the Lone Ranger, came over the hill and, here to fix the problems of the village. So he's an outsider, and he was a large personality. To them, that was good. A lot of people on the left say, this guy is so narcissistic. How can you be a leader and be this self-absorbed? But to the people I'm talking to, that's actually good, because what you need is a personality, they say, that can almost act like a state, that it's big enough to encounter and come up against, bump up against China, big enough. And even that his girth, that's a good thing, that he's big because he has to encounter a lot of things and win over them. And it's good that he's a businessman, outsider, and that he seems to have it all. So these are aspirations. It's also a plus that he seems a little vulnerable, actually, and gets himself shamed and then gets rid of the shame. So now I'm going to look at it. Joan said I do look at things psychologically, and I do. How could this set of complaints be mobilized into a grievance? I think there are certain telltale signs. First, Trump has signaled loss. He doesn't say, oh, America's great. No, the magic is in the word again. What he means is America's gone downhill, and he is speaking to the red states, which really have gone for the blue collar and lower middle class, mom and pop stores and blue collar, high school educated Americans. It has gone downhill. So he's acknowledging that. See, I see what you're going through, and I'm going to rescue you. And he does certain shame reductive things, because a lot of people who've been downhill, who've been addicted, have lost their jobs, had to come back from another town, didn't make it. There's a lot of unwarranted shame where people are blaming themselves for the circumstances they've had to deal with, and they've tried hard but didn't work out. And what I think Trump does is kind of put us through a little shame ritual where he'll say something outrageous, all Mexican are rapists, and then the punditry, the society says, shame on you, you can't say a thing like that. And then he will rail against the shamers. And I think there's something cathartic with that. You can't, it's a sort of anti-shame little ritual. And then he has offered people to blame China, blame immigrants, blame Muslims, and that this emotional strategy, you might say, has worked on a lot of people. So in chapter 3, what we have is the beginning of a mobilization of that set of complaints and a beatification of it. He says, I am suffering for you. And people think, oh, he's doing for us. He's taking on our pain. In a chapter 4, here we're coming close to the moment we're in. There's, I've suffered for you. And I've suffered against all these enemies. So the people I'm talking to, every time Trump says, oh, the deep state is coming after me, and the treasonous press is coming after me, and the Democratic Party is coming after me, and Nancy Pelosi is coming after me. They feel, oh, he's having to, with his large ego, fight for us against these enemies, both external and internal, and in fact, increasingly internal. And so with all of this kind of internalizing this story, he can say to his followers, so now you suffer for me. You come forward and represent your devotion to me and march on the Capitol. And then comes the moment that we've seen, and a period of terrible confusion for those on that side of the river. And for many, here's what I'm hearing. They feel on the one hand that the left and the Democratic Party and majority of Americans are saying those who invaded the Capitol are criminals. They need to be brought to justice to the full extent. So that from the left, but they also feel abandoned from the right, and they're kind of stuck in the middle. There's a kind of a squeeze. They're abandoned on the right because Donald Trump himself said, no, you've broken the law. And Donald Trump himself made 74 pardons, but he didn't pardon the people that broke into the Capitol. And in fact, I talked to one man who's a recovering addict. He said, I went through every 74 of those pardons of Donald Trump, and I think about 10 or 15 of them are people who had were drug dealers that actually pushed drugs. So they feel betrayed on that side. So now what's going to happen? I think this is why, because the answer to that is uncertain. I think this is why this is an issue that's not going to go away, and that the time is ripe for the kind of call that President Biden has made for unification. And but how can we think more specifically and helpfully about this? I talked to a man who actually started in just before the election, a caravan from Coal Run in Kentucky of up to 4,000 vehicles that went for 35 miles in a giant 8, honking their horns and Trump flags and hats. What are those people now going to do? What I'm hearing them say is, oh, we disapprove of anything that's illegal. They shouldn't have, people became hotheads, then they shouldn't have destroyed property or hurt anybody. But then they say, but it wasn't a coup, and the president didn't incite this. People should take responsibility for their own behavior, and I'd vote for him again. And a number are saying, no, President Trump is not going to come back. He won't run again, but we're still upset by the direction of the country. So it's lightning in a bottle, and the bottle is in a sense broken, but there is still the absence of an off-ramp, you might say, to that degree of mobilized distress. So what needs to be done? First, I think that for the extremists, we do need kind of what the sociologist Michael Kimmel has written about. There are programs that get people to renounce violence, and I think there needs to be stepping up of that sort. As we know, under Trump, there was a focus on left-wing violence, but a defunding of work to confront right-wing violence. But apart from the violent fringe of the right, what could we do? I think all the attitudes against bridge building that I mentioned earlier have to be challenged, that we need to think of empathy as strategically important for any nation, even for any war. I mean, the best generals are not those who say, oh, don't tell me about the enemy, I'm just going to get my gun. No, he wants to understand exactly what the thinking and needs are on the other side, even though they are not his needs or don't lead to his beliefs. And I think the real leaders in the world, people like Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, became masters of understanding, quote, the other side of the river. So one kind of bridge building could be to focus on economic interests. The guy I mentioned who organized the caravan of thousands of vehicles that went 35 miles, continuous caravans, that very guy in Eastern Kentucky, big Trump enthusiasm, grows hemp. Why? He grows hemp for biomass, which he wants to use which he does use, to make natural gas to be added to the fuel supply of Delta Airlines so that it can be lessen the effect of climate change. The very same guy. Well, now why not get him together at a conference on this issue? And you don't have to talk politics, because actually, if you just take people of different regions and different social classes, different races, you have politics, okay? And so just interest to interest bridges. Then there's institution to institution bridges. I'm personally involved with a high school to high school program where now some 17 states have signed up for high school students in the South to get on Google and meet. They do meet 3 or 4 times a week with high school students in the North. Coastal kids are getting to know kids in the center of the country. They don't start with politics, they start with interests. And actually, although it is a lot of these, everybody's shut down because of COVID, but when Lake Charles, where this program began, where I did my research too, was hit by 3 different storms, completely shattering Lake Charles. It's a disaster right now. And students in these northern schools are saying, hey, we want to get up a group and come to Lake Charles and help you rebuild. That's that's an example of an institutional bridge. We could have universities exchange students in the same way. And I'm now in touch and part of a group of a guy who's a farmer, and he's trying to get food to food, hydroponic tomatoes to be grown in Eastern Kentucky and sold in New York. Again, there are possibilities that are there if we only looked for them and didn't immediately stereotype the people on the other side of the river. So I think there is a need for us to also acknowledge the failures of the Democratic Party that calls itself the party of the working man and the working woman, but it has actually turned a blind eye to a lot of social class issues that I think are partly behind the flood in this metaphor. So let me stop there and say that if we want to solve the problem of flooding, I think we need to build a lot of bridges and figure out why the river has flooded in the first place. What are the ultimate circumstances that have led to this division? So let me stop there and entertain any discussion or questions.
Thank you very much, Arlie. There are quite a few questions already here, and let me start with this one here. So let's say we get who the Trump voters are. The question is, how will they understand that the people who committed the coup committed unlawful and punishable behavior and need to be punished, and Trump, who told them to come, committed treason and needs to be punished too?
So the question is, how do we convince the people on the other side that we are right and they are wrong? Is that well, I think the people that I'm talking to, the populist Republicans in forest state of Appalachia, would be a hard conversation to start that way. I think the way to have a conversation with such a person, let me back up and say that not everyone has to be a bridge builder. You know, we're all working on important issues, each of us, I think. So it takes someone who has to want to do it. You can't go in to bridge building and say, well, actually, I don't want to build a bridge. I just want you to swim across to my side. But there are really artists at bridge building. And I think Joan Blades, who is the co-founder of moveon.org and who is the founder of Living Room Conversations, which I've participated in, she's Bay Area based, is one of those artists. She's a mediation lawyer. And how she would begin that conversation is not, oh, you stupid person, you don't, you're not lawful yourself. It wouldn't begin with that. It would begin with, well, what is the Constitution? And do you care about the Constitution? And the person on the right will say, yes, absolutely, I do. In fact, it's the Bible to me. And do you care about democracy? And the person on the right side of the river would say, absolutely. My brother fought in Iraq and my Dad fought in Korea, and they fought for the right to live in a democracy. So then you would have some, you both have life preservers, and there's some point of commonality, and then you would come to the question. In other words, there's an art to do it. You don't just plunge in with your own perspective. So I think actually that this kind of art should be taught in school along with civics. I think we should all get good at it. It's not that hard. And that just these questions ought to be on the agenda to address. But again, we're going to have to switch regions and social classes and races to have these, and then get good at the effectiveness of these conversations. For example, I was talking with an extreme right winger in Louisiana about renewable energy and climate change. Oh, there's no such thing as climate change. No such thing. Renewable, you don't need it. We've got oil right here in Lake Charles. And then I said, well, there is some science on the other side indicating that the poles are warming and so on. Well, he wasn't sure about that. Then I said, do you know who are the real leaders in climate change and in renewable energy? The US military. They've looked at the data, and this is what they're doing. And suddenly, so what we're learning there is that if you examine who the other side takes as a credible communicator, and you make some points through that credible communicator, you're going to get a lot farther.
Okay, the next question is, you make a compelling case for the attraction of Trump for the marginalized people you've been studying. I'd like to know the extent to which this was a conscious strategy on Trump's part and the extent to which the madman met his moment. And is it duplicable by others? That's part one of the question. I give you that first.
Well, I think certainly that when Trump got up before a crowd in Kentucky and said, I'm bringing coal back to you, that it was a conscious strategy on his part to disregard what everybody actually knew, that natural gas was cheaper and these guys couldn't make money anymore digging coal. So I think Donald Trump was canny in this regard, but that his aim was to acknowledge depression and lift hope. He gave a lot of people hope. Donald Trump was an antidepressant. So is he, what was the second part of the question?
Can you discuss the motivations of handmaidens of Trump in the ranks of Republican lawmakers? Are they simply following their sense of their political self-interest wherever it goes?
Yes. Rand Paul, for example. These are people who are not fooling anybody. They are firm in their own beliefs. And what you have to understand is how they see the other bank. They see, when they look at the Democratic Party, no help for them. they see the Democratic Party is all split up with identity politics. And the Democratic Party has a cultural 9mm, and it's kind of it's culturally ruins reputations and cancels people that way and changes the name. You know, San Francisco, 45 new schools you're renaming everything. They see the Democratic Party as elite and culturally sowing chaos. They believe that there's a strategy on the left to make chaos, and that such people as are on the Democratic bank of the river are not trying to help most Americans. And they're thinking of the, what did I say, 47% of them who voted Republican. They're feeling that the left doesn't care about social class, doesn't care about the losers of globalization. And backing up from that, it is from 1970 on that we do see a big gap by education in kind of the whole life world of workers. And that is, if you have a BA back in 1970, little piece of just stepping back in history from 1970 on, if you had a BA, you're pretty much like the guy who doesn't have a BA. You're likely to be married, likely to be living with the mother of your children, likely to be volunteering with help coaching the baseball team at school, likely to be going to church. Now, if you have a BA, yeah, pretty much that story 20 years later, 30 years later. But for the blue collar worker without a BA, you're more likely not to be married, not to be employed, to be out, in fact, of the labor force, not to be living with the mother of your children, not to be going to church. The only thing you're likely to be doing more is being addicted and sleeping and watching television. So Donald Trump, so people, that's being kind of ignored, that story that I just said, a social class story, cross race, social class story. And the people on the other side are saying, you ignore us. In fact, you're sneering at us, you highly educated people. And you think we're backward and you think we're dumb. You fit the American narrative of success and don't understand those of us who don't fit it. And those of us who don't fit it have really tried hard and we still don't fit it. And we're humiliated by that. And there's somebody that understands our humiliation. The word humiliation and shame isn't used, but it's all the time played on. So I have my own little theory about the person Donald Trump. I think he knows a lot about shame. I personally think he must have had some learning disability. I don't think the guy reads. And had shame about it, which he shouldn't have, but he did. And so I think there's some understanding he has, and so that he really does, I think, mean to lift up people that need lifting up. I don't think he's fooling about that, but I think we need to set the person Donald Trump aside and look at Trumpism, the kind of aroused culture of suspicion and anger, and ask ourselves, I think it behooves us, it's smart of us to ask, where's it going to go? Because it's there.
The next question is a little bit, I think this more like a practical question, great thoughts and ideas, but how do you bring those ideas to the scale we need and fast, given the severity of the divisions? And how do you communicate if the two sides of the river don't have any of the same information sources?
Yeah, that's a big one. These are just wonderful questions, and we just need to put them front on our agenda. I personally would love to see President Biden appoint some cabinet level figure who could orchestrate a set of strategies to deal with the very question of sources of information. How, but because in my interviewing, I'm talking to people who don't agree on the facts and who are actually, some of them are thinking that Fox News is, moved too far to the left, actually. The guy that produces hemp and is interested in renewable energy, that was started the Caravan. I asked him about QAnon, and he said, well, it's interesting reading. So, yeah, I'm not sure I have easy answers for that, but I do believe that if we got the right people together, there are things we could do. I know there's a guy who's begun, he's a partner of Joan Blades in Living Room Conversations. So he takes the right, Joan takes the left, and they have conversations, and they help other people do conversations. And he started something called All Sides, which, so you'll take an item in the newspaper, and he'll, a factual item, and he has a panel that say, okay, this is the right, this is the left, this is the middle, and cite sources. So it's, if you could get something like that both sides of the river would agree was fair, a lot of people are bothered about the multiple reality problem. People on the right are also bothered by it. And they also don't like this divide.
Well, the following question, there was a similar question before. So how do you see the Christian and evangelicals in this picture?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. To go back to the journey of a grievance, it goes from complaint to grievance, and Donald Trump arrives, and then there's a beatification of Donald Trump for a lot of Christians. I went to a rally in New Orleans in 2016 with the Tea Party respondent that I've been following. And she and I were at the throngs of people, very excited, nearly everyone white, a lot older. And I saw a man who looked at Donald Trump and said to no one in particular, thousands of people there, and he said to no one in particular, "Oh, to be in the presence of such a man." And I think he has, that his narcissism has sort of permitted him to feel, yeah, he's right. I am the big giver. And I have come to save you. So it's a two-person thing. He feels like a savior, a messiah, a rescuer, and they take him that way too. And I think, evangelical Christians have a paradigm of the rapture, and of rescue and being taken up out of hard times, and that Donald Trump intuited this and has fit into it. A lot of people that say it's a paradox. Donald Trump holds the Bible upside down. Donald Trump never goes to church, or very seldom, always ceremonial. And Donald Trump, you ask him what's your favorite book of the Bible, and he'll say, "Oh, I like them all." He's not your most religious president. And yet, underneath, he tapped into a prevailing deep metaphor for a lot of people of being lifted out of hard times. I think we have to understand, we need to be political psychiatrists. We need to understand what's happened in those terms. That's not to say that's the only way to understand it, because there are structures, as I said, of social class that have divided the two sides. The left being the more prosperous, the right being the least prosperous. Despite the big money that feed the Republican Party, that is the story, and it's not, I think, spoken of enough by the Democrats. So there are structural issues, but beyond structure, I think it behooves us to look at how people feel, because that turns out to be in response to how they see the world, and it drives action. Yeah.
Well, the next question is, what can Congress do to build bridges instead of adding to the conflict?
Yeah, Congress can do a lot. And, OAC, who, Green New Deal and left, actually cooperated with Ted Cruz, right? Ted Cruz, who is the anointed after Trump. They cooperated on a bill, I don't think it got anywhere, but a bill to prevent legislators post-term rolling into lucrative lobbying jobs to stop corruption in Congress. They agreed on that. They wanted honest government, the two sides. And I give great credit, both sides, to such an effort. Okay, it didn't get there, but it's the right idea. And George Soros and David Koch, the well-known, famous philanthropists on the Democratic and the Republican side, also cooperated to reduce prison populations, each for different reasons. They didn't see it the same way, but they agreed that it would be a good thing to achieve that aim of getting people out of prison, getting them back to work, getting back to their families. So there are ways of finding common ground.
The next question is kind of twofold again. I have two question areas I didn't hear you address. Number one, race. What is the role of Blacks who are on Stacey Abrams in the next 4 years? And how do we strengthen them? How do we work with them? I think the Democratic Party has ignored both poor whites and Blacks and need to do much better. It looks like Biden is doing much better. And second, what about the elected Republican officials who seem to want to oppose their constituents' economic interests and block democratic economic programs?
Right. Well, race is absolutely critical here. And it's, I think, one of the major bridges that we need to build. And I think Stacey Abrams is the person we can thank for the Democratic Party having both houses. I honestly think she is extraordinary and has a future. But the job is ahead of us and not behind us. And I think who could be those bridge builders? You know, there's the Attorney General of Kentucky, one of his main sort of speeches is about hood to the holler, about common kinds of dilemmas that to the two groups. And I don't think one hears much of that. The people that I'm talking to and I'm asking them about race, when I say, is there systemic racism? And I'm getting a no. Okay. But you know what's interesting? If they have children in college, the college kids come home and say, yeah, there is systemic racism. And the father will say, oh, I didn't have a toothbrush till I was 16. I started working when I was 12 at a gas station. I'm gonna laugh you out of the house about systematic racism. You know, we've had it hard. And then the daughter will say, yeah, but how did Kentucky do? What about the blacks that got shooed out in 1921 after they came back from fighting in World War I, and there was scarcity of jobs and they were pushed out of a particular community. So those conversations need to happen. But again, we need a whole national re-education on race. The new book out, I'm in the middle of it, Isabel Wilkerson's Cast, I think, sets the agenda for both sides of the river. But it's a basic job, and I think it is doable long term.
At this point, I mean, you have been already very generous with your time. I'd just like to ask you how many more questions you're willing to answer. I have to tell you, there are 78 new messages here.
It's a big topic, you know, you're the one person.
Right.
Let's take two more.
Two more. Okay. There is one actually about, I think we haven't really talked about that yet. There's one about the media. What do you see as the role of the media in the age of social media?
Yeah. Okay. It's huge. It's huge. There's so much to say, but if I pick out Facebook, the people I came to know, really tried to get to know really well, I noticed that there was a huge difference between who they were if you went fishing on a fishing trip in a boat in the swamp. This is in Louisiana, and one of my respondents I wrote about was totally different in how he showed himself on Facebook. You know, as we're fishing in the swamp and he's just talking, he said, you know, I'm not sure about what I think. And I think the Republicans have made a lot of problems, and I'm not proud of things, you know. He'll say that in the vote, but if you look at his Facebook page, you know, his armor is on. And he said, yeah, Facebook, you know, that's the little man's platform. And that's what he thought he was. And so there's a lot of breastfeeding and grandiosity on, and adversarial sort of ridicule on Facebook that he did not say to me face to face. So there's something to be said for face-to-face encounters, and developing the terms of mutual respect, so that people can question their sources of information with each other. How did you find that out? Well, let's us look that up. You know, if you can get that wavelength, there's a lot you can do. In the meantime, we need to talk more about the effect of the media as a problem. And what the right thinks is that the left is totalitarian. We are the fascists. I mean, the right side of the river is saying about the left that high tech is closed down conversation. They don't believe in open flow of ideas. That's why Facebook and Twitter and so on have shut things down. So that is their perception. And that the left is very bubbled and closed on itself and self-satisfied. That is the perception of people on the right side of the river. So I don't have any quick answers, but I could say what some of the problems are in sitcoms and left-wing comedians. The people on the right look at those programs and they check into CNN and MSNBC and they watch Mayer and all these comedians and see themselves ridiculed, and they just fold their arms. Oh, there they are, those snowflakes, those people that don't really work, those people with desk jobs and high degrees. So they're putting us down, but we're the people that keep the lights on, and we're the people who climb the telephone poles. We're the people that fix their lives, create the infrastructure of them. And do we get any thanks? No. We're seen as hillbillies and rednecks. And so they work themselves up into a concept of the left as against of the working class, the blue collar class. I'm not sure I answered the media question, but it's just to say it's really big and important.
Okay, so I think that the last question is, let me just see, I need to find it again because I thought it would be a nice question for us to end. So somebody was asking, actually, as older adults living here, yeah, how can we older people living in the Bay Area help personally to build these bridges with the older people in the more rural areas Arlie is describing?
The older, the better, honestly. You know, I gave a talk at a retirement community, and there was a very large group. It happened to be a community that had the largest Democratic committee in the state of California. And they were all people from the 1960s and hot to trot, you know, so that I thought, in a way, the golden years are political gold. And it's a question of figuring out what to do with all of that political and moral gold, all of that goodwill all of that desire for a better world. I think the older community is just what society needs to come forward with its wisdom and goodwill. And one step could be to join the Bridge Alliance. This would be check it out. There are some 80 or 90 different smaller organizations. Hi from the Other Side is the name of one. Living Room Conversations is another. Or some of these institution and issue-based bridges, start one yourself, and keep an eye on all the initiatives that are out there, because the world does need older people a lot. You have a lot to give. Thank you.
Joan, thank you very much, Arlie. Thank you for being so generous with your time. And I think, Joan, are you closing?
I'm right here.
Yeah, okay.
What a perfect transition that last question was to what I would like to speak about. Arlie, thank you for your incredibly generous and wise presentation. You have so much to give us. But what I want to say is, I'm repeating what Andy said at the beginning. This presentation has been presented by Ashby Village's Elder Action Interest Group, which is a very, very lively group committed to nonpartisan social action. And you are welcome to join us. If you leave your name and number in our chat room, someone will get back to you. You don't need to be a member of Ashby Village to join our Elder Action Interest Group. And we are really interested in issues of social justice. Our next talk will be on February 14th, which happens to be Valentine's Day, when Professor Lawrence Rosenthal will talk about something about the roots and the role of the right-wing organizations in the United States. He'll be talking about how we can better understand what led to the events that shook our nation's capital last month, what we can expect that the myth of the stolen election with its roots in systemic racism will inspire in the months to come. Larry is a professor and lead researcher and chair of the UC Center for Right-Wing Studies, and you can find more about this on our website. We really hope that you enjoy these presentations. We have our arts and lecture presentations and now our Elder Action presentations, and they are all brought to you by our members. And our members cover about 60% of our costs, our operating costs. The balance is provided by generous donors like you. Please consider giving a gift to Ashby Village. And thank you so much for being here.